Yes, my name's Stephen Bellman, not Dwayne Duran, so apologies to anyone who flew all the way to Barcelona to see Dwayne Duran. He's tied up in Chicago. He's opening his new lab, which is going to be twice as big as his lab in Austin, in the first week of May. And things are never as easy as you predict, so he's there working like day and night trying to make sure it happens. So he gave me a call and said we'd like to fly all the way from Australia to Barcelona to present instead of him, and I said yes. And I just want to work on what I'm going to present, so I'll give you the, sort of the meat of what he would have presented, even though I won't have maybe the same fireworks that Dwayne would have brought to this. Now, Robert Heath was talking about how the difficulty for neuromarketing is that we need to measure the very small responses, the kind of unconscious things that maybe only happen deep inside the brain where only fMRI can reach. And because that's such a hard thing to do, we chose to do a very easy thing instead, and that's to measure humour. Now, that ad that I played was meant to be a humorous, funny ad, very poor quality, but advertisers are interested in humour in advertising because maybe it does increase attention to the ad, maybe it sustains attention over repeated exposure. But again, it's a very hard problem. Does humour in advertising lead to persuasion? Does it lead to increased recall? Latest research in Journal of Advertising Research and Marketing Science says that there's kind of like an optimal level of humour to have. So again, we thought that was all too hard. What we're looking at is the stimulus funny or not? A very simple, easy question. But important to television networks, because some of the biggest scripted programming that they have is situation comedy. And every year at the upfronts, where the big advertisers buy all their advertising up front, so they get a quantity discount in May, they are shown by the TV networks all the new sitcoms in the form of trailers, 3-minute trailers. And from that, they have to try and make a decision about whether to buy advertising in that sitcom or not, even though it won't air until September or October later on that year. So we thought, wouldn't it be great if you had some way of figuring out which of these situation comedies is going to be successful or not, even though you've only seen the trailer in May. And our hypothesis was that if, obviously if you're making a trailer for a situation comedy, you put all your jokes into the trailer, and so that it may not be representative of the show, but definitely it would be funny. So even if your trailer is not funny, that's a definite sign that this show is not going to be successful, because you couldn't even find a joke to stick in the trailer. So that's our working hypothesis. So our hypothesis was that if a situation comedy's trailer, here it's only 3 minutes long, if it had some funny bits in it, then it would be successful. If it wasn't funny, then it wouldn't be successful. And we've been trying to kind of experimenting with a level of smiling which is genuine smiling. So here we thought that 25% of the maximum intensity of smiling was a level where people were really smiling. And in the background of this, you can see the slightly darker colour. This is kind of our attempt at Interscope's synchronicity measure, where it's that the more people are sharing the measure, the darker the background colour. And also, just by the laws of statistics, if more people have the same measure, then that would be the mode of the distribution. So where it's darker with this point here, that means that quite a lot of people who were watching the trailer had a smiling response greater than 25%. But that only occurred 2 times, about 10% of the duration of this trailer. So we would predict that this would be a not very successful sitcom, and it turned out in the 2013-14 season, this was one of the ones that fell into the bottom half of the distribution. It wasn't that successful. In contrast, here's one that was actually the top rating new sitcom introduced in 2013-14, and you can see for about 50% of its duration, people are smiling, greater than 25%. And you can also see this very dark band here in some of these intense peaks, so everyone in the sample was laughing. But for some of the peaks, there's a diversity, it's not very dark. And we did an analysis splitting the sample by gender, and you can see that women laughed more at the mirrors than men did. So that was the reason for why we had that diversity at the peaks. So this peak measure, and you can see also here that Michael J. Fox had very low, only about 10% duration smiling. This peak measure seemed kind of the way to go for testing trainers, except that if we look here at some of these ones that are coming second and third, in the results from 2014, these shows did not come second and third in the actual audience numbers. So perhaps peak is not the solution. And the reason why is that humour is kind of like a story. It's a process. It involves two stages. You have the setup, and then you have the payoff. And I'll try to illustrate this by telling a joke, and I hope this goes okay. I did some research and I found a site that had the top 50 jokes of all time, and this was one of them. So I hope it works. So I've just got back from a once-in-a-lifetime trip. That's the setup. And the payoff is never again. So the payoff only works when you have the setup. Now, this kind of shows you why you wouldn't use the measure of central tendency, because the measure of central tendency tends to reflect the setup rather than the payoff, whereas the peak just reflects the payoff and doesn't give any credit to the setup. It's kind of like, you're going to see a lot of these iceberg slides today, probably. I'm trying to hijack the meaning of them.
We are causing them.
Yeah. So I hope that every time you see one from now on, you'll remember that you shouldn't show the peak of a joke. And some people say you could cut a 30-second ad down to like 9 seconds by just showing the peak moments. That's not going to work if it's a funny ad, because you need all the stuff that leads up to the peak to get the impact of the joke. So we were thinking about what's a better way of measuring humour that takes account of the setup and the payoff. And this is some work that was done by a PhD student of ours called Jenny Juppers. She's actually a doctor now, Dr. Jenny. And she looked at the humour techniques that are used in sitcoms. And she found that in current US sitcoms, they use about 22 techniques. And they come under 4 headings: language, logic, identity, action. And these bold ones here are the ones that are used the most. But just because it's not used very often, a technique like caught out can still be very funny if you use it, because it's classic fast technique. It's the lover hiding in the cupboard kind of thing. Their devious plan has been caught out. And what Jenny did was she measured scene conductance when the humour technique caught out was being used versus when it was not being used. And here you can see that when the humour technique is being used, you can see that setup and payoff pattern, whereas you don't see it in the other one. And she thought about various ways of measuring the difference between them. Obviously, the mean, these two things, probably have exactly the same mean, so that's no good. Could use peak, but then you get that iceberg problem. You only got the tip of the iceberg, not the rest. So she thought about variance, but this one here has got a much narrower standard deviation than the humour technique. So that was a possibility. Another one was using calculus. So you could see that this one has much bigger changes in velocity. That's like the first derivative. And the changes in velocity are the second derivative, so acceleration. So you can compare those two things between the two curves. But what she settled on instead was another measure from calculus, which is arc length. And that's the length of these two curves. So the length of the curve when you've got a humour technique present is much longer than the length of the curve when you haven't got a humour technique present. So we used arc length and other measures of smiling in May 2014 from the new, well actually no, what we did was we used the May 2013 smiling to predict which were the top rating in the actual season, so after it finished in 2014. And we used arc length and other measures in the model, and we did pretty well. So we predict 7 out of the top 7 shows. That's much better than chance. And even bigger correlation than we've seen so far today, 0.92 between the real audience numbers and the predicted audience numbers. They were within 1 percentage point, 1 rating point, we could predict the audience. And of the smiling measures, the best one was that arc length measure, which measures the setup and the payoff. Now, it's kind of easy to predict within sample. It's much harder to predict out of sample. And so what we did was take the risk of measuring in May 2014 smiling to trailers and predicting what we thought would be the top rating sitcoms in 2014, 2015. And then just last week I crunched the numbers and saw how we did. So we were able to predict 5 out of the top 6 sitcoms, which is still better than chance. And still a kind of impressive correlation between predicted and actual audience numbers. Now, some people may say that this is kind of an easy task because, of course, a CBS sitcom, they have a huge reputation for successful sitcoms. If you predicted a CBS sitcom was going to be number 1 or 2, you would always be right. And if you predicted that a Fox sitcom would be at the bottom, of course that's going to happen. So what would be harder to predict is that CBS, even though they had the number 2 rating sitcom, would pull that sitcom off before its season was over because it wasn't measuring up to their standards of how well a sitcom should perform. So again, back in July this year, we predicted which shows would grow the audience in their time slot compared to the same time the year before. So in 2014-15 compared to 2013-2014. And we said that 3 shows would grow their audience, and 3 shows, including the McCarthy's, the CBS sitcom, would lose their audience. And how did we do? Well, 10 out of 12 shows, including the McCarthy's, were in the right place, where we said they were going to grow their audience or lose their audience. And a pretty impressive correlation between actual and predicted growth numbers. But perhaps even more impressive is that we predicted all 6 of the shows that would be cancelled, just from the trailers in May.
So the big question, the research question of this undertaking was, what is the power of sound in advertising? What is the power of visuals in advertising? And what is the power, if you put those 2 together, all from a neuroscience perspective, in terms of something that we can measure with respect to engagement? And so often we make judgments about the sum of the parts being, or the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, and that was also a question here. Are you only as good as your strongest variant, or together is there more possible power? So if we are realistic from an empirical perspective, as well as a research study that we did to make sure that we were what we were talking about, the truth is that people watch TV in 3 different ways nowadays. You think about TV watching, and there's a lot of talk about attention, but when you ask people if they normally watch TV with sight and sound, almost everybody does sometimes, but only 43% of the US population says that they watch it with sound and sight often. So where's the other 57% of your audience that isn't getting the whole story? So if we ask people if they ever watch TV by just listening, 85% will say with sound only, and 42% say that they listen to ads often without looking at the visuals. That totally changes the dynamic in terms of how your story is getting across. And it seems as if a lot of this listening-only behavior is premeditated. I mean, I know I do it personally. I have the TV going on in the other room when I'm cooking, when I'm packing, which is often lately. And it's there, it's a comfort, I'm getting some dribs and drabs, but I don't turn on the TV with the intention of watching it, more to get what I can from sound. In terms of watching only, you see that 53%, so it's less, say that they only watch with visuals only, and only 9% say that they do it often. this behavior, where you're only getting the visuals, tends to be more disruptive. It doesn't seem to be as planned. It happens really when the phone rings, when you're talking, you get disrupted, so you turn off the sound. But you're still seeing, as Carl mentioned today, there's certain things that make you look. And when there's motion in a TV, even if you're on the phone or talking to somebody, you tend to look and get a little bit of information sideways. So, if we look at the heart rate, I will tell you that it indicates an edge towards audio engagement. And this darker blue line is the audio only, the light blue line is the visual only, and the black line is the audio plus visual. So there's a lot of individual differences on a per ad basis. I think someone said earlier this morning that it all comes down to the individual ad. But if you look at a body of 15 random everyday ads, you're going to see this pattern emerging where audio has a little bit of an edge. Same thing occurs as a group set with facial coding. Again, audio only has an edge. And so it's nice to see the two different methodologies converge. And just to be sure, we looked at the differentiation for audio only with facial coding when we were just looking at the happiness measure. Why? Because I was concerned that if we looked at it only in aggregate, that maybe some of the emotional response was, what the heck is going on? And that there was maybe a little more effort to cognitively try to understand what was happening. And so just as a double check, we looked at happiness only, and we still found that ads with audio only had the edge. So what I want to do now is show you some individual traces and see what some of what the range of response can be like. So naturally, sometimes visuals can rule. As much as we say that audio has the edge, it's not always the case. So here's one where video clearly has the edge.
I love going all natural. It just makes me feel better. Nothing between me and my 100% all natural, juicy, grass-fed beef.
Introducing the all-natural burger, the first ever in fast food, with no antibiotics, no added hormones, and no steroids. Only at Carl's Jr.
That's appetite appealing, right? Okay. And we all know there's certain cliches or conventional wisdom in advertising. Babies, dogs, brides, horses. But visuals can clearly lead in examples like this where there's a baby in the ad.
An elite group. Gerber's panel of 2,000 taste testers. Theirs is a mission to bring goodness to every high chair. So your baby's food is as delicious as it is nutritious. They are the chosen few, and they won't rest until they've... Okay, they might rest a little. Gerber baby food. Growing up. Gerber.
Okay. And so, as I mentioned, and every creative knows, if you ever worked in an ad agency, as I have, that there are certain things that are kind of tricks that you have in your pocket in terms of getting attention, and it can be food appeal, sex appeal, animal appeal, and a number of others. We also used to say if you're that putting a client in the ad could have a lot of appeal as well. Audio has its edge. Now here's an example of an ad that just doesn't have average audio, but it has audio that somebody thought about to break through and really give some potential communication that was over and above. Whoops. Don't work.
What are you doing?
The dishes are clean. Just gotta scrape the rest of the food off them.
Ew. How is that clean?
Dish issues? Quiet them with Cascade Platinum. It powers through your toughest messes better than the competition. The first time.
Clean.
Stop it.
Cascade. Now that's clean.